Good morning, friends. It is I, Kalbardr, coming to you live from the Barony of the Osprey on the southern coast of Meridies. Companion of the Meridian Cross, companion of the Argent Lamp, Osprey, and Reaper. And I realize those of you coming to this live from Atlantia will have no clue what some of those words mean, but that's okay. They're just all my fancy words that I like to throw in to make me sound more important than I actually am. So today we are coming to you in the Atlantian University, and I want to thank all the folks at the Atlantian University for allowing me, a humble Meridian, to come and teach in your college. We're gonna have a lot of fun today. I have 2 classes planned, and I am just stoked to be here. So first, what's our topic for this morning? So this is survey of race and chase games. So first of all, I'd like to throw out a quick caveat. This class is a sort of in production, I guess. This was a project that started as a thing that I was just sort of doing some research into, and then morphed into a class, morphed back into a project, and then back into a class again. But so it's sort of in the works. I start out with that because it is not at all where I want it to be for like long term, but it is there, and we're going to talk and have some fun today about it. So the purpose of this class, or sort of the topic of this class, is going to be looking at a style of games. So I say that because it is not, we're going to talk about more of the game mechanics. So my focus in the SCA is very much games and game mechanics and game learning, less so on history. And I know that's weird coming from a historical reenactor or recreator, but I like to look at the actual mechanics of the games, how the games were played, what the pieces were, sort of how the games functioned, less so on like the impact of the game or sort of some of the history bits of the game. We will cover some of that, and some of that is covered in the class and in my other classes as well, in my how to plays. And that was something that I'll get into in some of the more in-depth classes, but I like learning the games. Games to me are important in the SCA because they are one of those ambiance pieces, things that get missed. So we have the fighting, we have the teaching, we have the classes, we have the feasts. Games provide that extra little bit of stuff going on. And if we make them more common instead of just the late night, or even in the late night, it adds a little extra flair to an event and makes it interesting. So I'm going to throw my screen up real quick. So race style games, and I had trouble when I first started naming this class of what I wanted to call it, because the terms race games and chase games are sort of interchangeable. This is any class of games that involves pieces moving from point A to point B in some sort of track. So either it's a circular track or a snake or a spiral or whatever. And generally it is a first to the end wins, or first to have all the pieces off at the end wins. The mechanics have changed a bit. The sort of some of the nuances of those things have changed, but the sort of overall, that's the category we're looking at. So there's some common ones that people know. Chutes and ladders, Candyland, Backgammon is another one, and that shows you actually 2 variants of that there. Both Chutes and Ladder and Candyland are point A, point B with 1 piece, whereas Backgammon is 2 different directions, but still a point A to point B, but with multiple pieces. And we'll get into some of those different mechanics here in a second. But the topic you're looking at is anything that covers those. All right, so let's look at a timeline first, and I guess actually let's cover the games included, and we'll look at the timeline. So for this class, I've covered 4 major games that I've done some research into from period, and I'll end up actually sort of almost pre-period for what the initial SCA was. So this is Backgammon, it's also called Nard. Senate, it's also called 30 squares. 5 lines or pentagramme. I'm sure I'm butchering that Latin, but it is what it is. I'm from the South. I don't speak Latin. I speak English and bad English. And then the royal game of or your, also called 20 squares, variant of 30 squares. So the earliest dating of these, and this is one of those spots that the historians will argue and probably get into fistfights over, dates back to about 3000 BC. which is backgammon, found in the Persian Empire. Now, 2500 to 3000, 3500 BC, there's a whole lot of variation of the oldest. Every site you look at, it's some sort of game. So this is the oldest game in history. Okay, cool. This is the oldest I found. This sort of that I could find multiple confirmed dates of. When I'm doing research, I found a source and go, okay, this is a good source, cool. And then I move on to another source, and then another source, another source. When I find multiple sources giving me similar information, within a 100-year time frame, that's the data I'm going to use. So 3000 BC is about the oldest I've found, at least documented. I'm sure they were probably playing it before then. This is the oldest document we can find. So looking a little further forward, 2600s, Senate was found in a painting in a tomb of Hesi from about the 3rd dynasty. This obviously this wasn't found until much later, but they dated the tomb to the 2600s. 2500 was the oldest board from the royal game of Ur. It's found in 1926 in a dig, and unfortunately that dig wasn't very well documented, so trying to find exact details of that are difficult. But they figured that the actual board was dated about the 2500s BCE. Senate popped up in Egypt in moving from just a game to part of the Journey of the Dead. So if you actually watch, when you're looking at Senate, and we'll get into that in the class about Senate when I teach it at some other point later, that the game went from just being a, yay, we're moving pieces along the board, to it sort of became a cultural journey. Some of the spaces on the board were named after things, and I mentioned those in one of the spots later on. But it became much more of a cultural impact, much more of a part of their religious and historical significance, as opposed to just a fun game. Looking forward to 600 BC, the oldest excellent examples I can find of 5 lines or pentagramme. Now, the only examples we found of this have been mentioned in some books. 5 lines seemed to be more of a math theory than anything. There have been boards that looked similar or could have been used for 5 lines because of the simplicity of the board, literally just being a line with some lines across it. It was difficult because you literally could just draw it on anything. It's not quite a very like an obvious board to find. And then moving almost into the Common Era, 177 to 176 was the tablet describing main elements of the roll game of Ur. So it's interesting that that's the problem. We have a lot of games from periods, especially the older games, the games that didn't last until the 14, 15, 1600s, was there's no writing about them. We're finding them in paintings, we're finding boards, we're finding pieces, but we're not finding the actual, they didn't write books, they didn't write manuals back then. Either they didn't have written language, or they were it was in hieroglyphics, or the games were so common that they didn't need to write them. Some of these games are fairly easy enough that you wouldn't necessarily need to write them. You could teach them in 30 seconds. But a lot of them now, the rules we're using, we have sort of guessed at based on what we're seeing, based on a number of pictures we have, based on a number of sort of context clues. And I talk about that more in the Alkirk class I'm teaching after this one. But you're literally looking at paintings and then looking at games we have today and going, okay, this looks like this. This has these pieces, it has these kind of dice or whatever. How would this have been played? And then you look at notes that you found throughout the time period and kind of piece them together, which makes for an interesting idea, but it's definitely makes for some guesswork. All right, so looking at mechanics. So when I wrote this category up, there are sort of 5 mechanics that are in common throughout them, and we kind of talk about each one of them. And the eventual goal of this class is to have a large sort of catalog of each of these, of where each game is covered in this. So we're going to look at dice or sticks for movement. The idea of bearing off or having pieces removed from the board. This is also called the win condition. Any mechanic involving attacking or hitting or removing of a piece. So like in checkers, when you jump a piece, same idea. Chase games does it a little differently. And then any safe spaces or special spaces. So whereas in checkers and chess, every space on the board is equal. There is no difference in the actual board. The pieces have differences. In some of the chase and race games, the board does have meaning. Like Candyland, there's always the peppermint swirl space or the that get you stuck there for a turn. Same idea. Oh, excuse me. All right. So first we have the dice or sticks for movement. Now, in my intro to board games class I teach, I cover this a little more extensively, but when I say dice or sticks for movement, this is anything that allows the player to generate a random number. Okay, so dice and sticks have been used obviously since the early times, looking at backgammon. But what we know of as dice, the six-sided cube, likely isn't what they were using. At least not until a little later. So you're looking at sticks where they had either a convex or concave side, some sort of multiple coins kind of thing. So this category kind of covers that, and I talk about each one of them individually here. So backgammon use either 2 or 3 six-sided dice. There are some variants that use 3 dice. Most of them use 2. So it gave you a number between 2 and 12. And this mattered of how you can move the pieces. Senate uses 4 painted sticks, so with one side marked and one side not marked. Most of the ones I've seen for Senate, the sticks were equivalent. There was not a convex or concave side, so they were flat both sides. But you could have a convex and concave side. Obviously, the one's easier to roll than the other. The idea of the 4 painted sticks is that it would give you a number ranging 1 through 5. So with 1 painted side up, you'd have a 1, 2 up, 2, 3 up, 3, 4 up, 4. But if no painted sides are up, it would either be a 0, or in this case, it would be a 5. I have seen, not very Senate, but other games that also use 4, or 4 painted sticks like that, where it would be a 0 to 4, as opposed to 1 through 5. I'd like to see who decided that initially and sort of where they made that distinction, but it's interesting. By the way, as we're going through this, guys, if you get any questions, please throw them in the chat. I do have the chat pulled up here on the screen. I will highlight your question on the screen so we can all look at it and discuss it. But I'm more than happy to answer your questions as they come up. All right, so looking forward to 5 lines. 5 lines was because it only has a very limited number of spaces, it used 1 six-sided die. I've actually done some looking at this game where I've changed the die, and I've actually done this in a couple of different games. Oh, excuse me. We're changing the die from a D6 to a D4, or using multiple dice, or even going over like the sticks versus the die. It does change the game drastically, actually. Makes it easier. Sometimes makes it easier, sometimes makes it harder. And the roll game of yore, this is the first weird one that I saw that was really interesting to me because it used 4-sided dice. Now, originally when I was looking at this, I thought that it used the tumble dice. So instead of being a 6-sided cube, it was a 6-sided prism. So with 4 sides being longer and the ends being capped or pointed or whatever, so that it was rolled this way. I have actually found extant examples of 4-sided pyramid dice, which makes sense. They had pyramids. They knew what the pyramid shape looked like. Just the sort of, I guess, technology to make that at the time wasn't there, at least that I thought initially. So, but it's possible. Now, their 4-sided dice were different than what we know as 4-sided dice today, where there's 1 through 4 on each die. They used it where they would mark on 2 or 3 of the sides, and then leaving one of the sides blank, which would give you a number ranging 0 to 4. If you rolled all of them, you just counted the pips that were facing up, or pips on the top, I guess, in this case. It does make it really easy to recreate if you can find a 4-sided die that are blanks. They've got them on Amazon, things like that. When I played it at an event in the before times, I used 6-sided dice and just sort of colored. I think I colored 4 of the 6 sides, so it gave you basically a 1 in 3 or 2 in 3 chance of getting a number. And again, that actually changed it even there. It changes the probabilities. So when you're looking at the statistics and probabilities of some of these things, changing that die, changing the number of dots on a thing does change that. So to sum up, so this being the all race games, because there is you have some sort of chance to them using some sort of mechanic to generate a random number. You guys are all quiet this morning. Everybody's good? Everybody good out there? Everybody got their coffee? All right. The object of most race games is to bear your pieces off, or to get your pieces off the board first. So race games range from one piece to multiple pieces. Sometimes that depends on the number of players. Most of the ones I'm covering, actually all of them covering here, are two-player games. There are four-player variants of Backgammon and of I think of just Backgammon. But there are other race games that do have more players. Although even the ones that have more players generally are two players, but then have four-player variants or three-player variants. And the number of pieces per player would change. So, for instance, I guess in Backgammon, you could change it from 15 pieces per player to 10 pieces per player, or 5 pieces per player, depending on how many players you had. But again, looking at the objective is to get all your pieces off the board first, whether it's 1 or 50. So with Backgammon, all the pieces have to move to the home board before pieces can bear off, but the player does not have to roll an exact number to bear off. Now, this is an important part of this mechanic is sometimes leaving the board does require a specific die roll. So if there are 5 spaces left, you have to have a 5 to get that piece off, or less if you can move forward. There are some games that require exact numbers depending on where you are. Backgammon is the only one I found in this set of 4. I'm sure there may be others that requires all the pieces to be in a certain position first before they move off. So most of them you can move them off in any order or at any time, depending you have the right die roll. Backgammon is one of the few that I've found that does require them all to be in that home board, or in that, in this case, the bottom right corner of the gameplay area. Senate's a really weird one. And we talk about some of the special spaces here in a second, but Senate does have the last 5 spaces are all special spaces and require a very specific set of rolls to get a piece off. And you have to have the exact number to get off. And once you're in that last spacing, you can't just advance forward 1. So for instance, if you're 3 spaces out or 2 spaces out, and you roll a 1, you cannot move that piece 1 space forward into a different special space. You have to actually move it from the spaces on to off. So that's another, I guess, weird one that has a special set of rules, but it does require the exact die roll. 5 lines is I guess an exception to this, because there is no bearing off, but there is a sort of spot it needs to be in, which is your same idea. The difference is, because they never leave the board, they can leave that spot. So in 5 lines, each player has a line they're supposed to be on the finish line. The goal is to get all the pieces there, but because the board is circular and you go around in a circle until you get to that spot. If at any point you have a forced movement where you cannot move a piece or cannot move one of the other pieces you have available, you do have to move one of your pieces off of your special line to start the track again. So there have been times where you've got 4 of your 5 pieces into your win condition, and then they get moved off, and basically restart the track. Now the track's not very long, so it's not hard to get back around. But because you need an exact number to land in that space, because you can't stop halfway through a movement, makes it a little more difficult to get back on there. And then the roll game of your does require an exact roll to leave the board. So when you're moving through, it's 1 space, 2 space, and then your third movement, if you have 3 spaces, has to be off the board. You can't have 1, 2, and 3, 4 off the board. So all race games require some sort of win condition of getting your pieces to either to a certain spot or off of the board Most of them require off the board, 5 lines being the exception in this one. All right, cool. Moving along, guys. So this class is not very long. I should have warned you guys early on. Most of my classes, because they are, I do a lot of how to plays. There's generally a lot of like 30 minutes of talking and 30 minutes of playing. So with this class, I usually would combine it with another how to play class. So we kind of do two. But I guess so I've got how to play after this. All right, the next mechanic we're going to look at is the attacking or hitting, or I don't want to call it a capture mechanic because there's really not a capture. It's generally an ejection. You know, in checkers you have capturing, and where a piece is removed and pulled back to the player who captured it as a prisoner. It's not the case in this because it goes back to the initial player. So generally that player, even though they've been ejected from the board, they still have to get that piece through. So even if they get ejected or kicked back to the beginning or whatever, they've still got to get that piece through. So it's a sort of a restart, more of a capture. And unlike checkers or TOEFL or other capture games, most of these are involving landing on the player. You ever played? It's fun to get into trouble. It's same idea. So with Backgammon, you have a point or the space on the board. If a single piece is there on that point by itself, it is considered vulnerable. And if an opponent lands a piece on top of that piece is captured or ejected from the board and moves back to the central bar. Now with Backgammon, it does give you a special bit of rule where you have to move that piece first. So if you have a piece that is captured or that has been ejected from the board, then that piece has to be the next piece to move on your turn, entering back from your starting spot on your board. Senate, in this case, Senate is an exception. With every rule, there's always exceptions. With Senate, pieces never leave the board until the end, until the bearing off. And there's actually, when I teach the class on Senate, there are 2 rule variations for Senate. One of them, they start off the board and go onto the board and then don't leave. And then the other one, they start on the board and leave at the end. So it was, again, variations based on the guesses we've made. So with Senate, when you're attacking a piece, instead of it leaving the board, they swap spaces. So it's my piece is moving 3 spaces forward, and I land on top of your piece. Your piece moves back to my original starting spot, which can be a pretty drastic swing, especially when you've got pieces grouped together and things like that. Which there is one of the special rules for Senate that's a variation that I usually play with. That if pieces are together, at least 2 pieces together on a line, they are safe. Sort of same thing with the Backgammon rule. But that can get you moving from almost at the end to 5, in this case 5 or 6 spaces back is a pretty drastic swing. Especially if it gets the player who's attacking into a line of their own pieces and block one of your pieces behind them. It can be a pretty big move. 5 lines is the other exception to this rule. There's no attacking or hitting in 5 lines at all, actually, because there is no piece removal. The difference, however, in this is that the spaces are occupied. So because the board is so small, there are only 5, 10 spaces available. With the exception of the magic line, all spaces are only occupied by one piece at a time, which does cause forced movement. It does cause you to not be able to move. And it does cause you to have to move things off of your sacred line, or the magic line, sacred line, whatever you want to call it. So I guess that is the other exception to this rule, that because there is no piece removal, there is no actual attacking in Senate or in 5 lines. Rule game of your in the rule game of your board, there is a center line, a sort of center set of spaces where all the pieces have to go into. So they start off on their own side of the board, they move into a center line, and then back off to the outside of the board. Anybody in that center line is now vulnerable to be knocked off. If landed on, they are removed from the board and go back into the player's pile. Players usually start with 4 or 5 pieces off the board, and then moving them onto the board one at a time. So on that center line, if a piece is attacked or jumped on top of, they are put back in the player's stock to then be restarted. This can be a very big thing, especially when you've got a piece that's at the very end of that center line that is then attacked, because that's only 2 spaces from the goal. You get bumped off in that 2 spaces, and it would make you very grumpy. There is one exception in the role game board. There's a 1 space in the middle that is special that will allow it's a safe space. We'll talk about it in a second here. The attacking hitting mechanic is, I guess, the one that is the most accepted, or most exceptions. And there's some exceptions to special spaces too, but it is the one that's the least common with these games. As I've done some more research, I haven't think of things I haven't added to the class yet. I am finding more and more that do include an attacking or hitting mechanic that I need to get added here. Which, by the way, for all of you watching, both in this class and watching this in the future, because this is on my YouTube, will be there forever, at least as long as myself and my YouTube exists. I will be updating this class periodically, and I may end up reteaching this class at some point. But all of you, I will link the handout into the class description, and I think I emailed it to everybody from Atlantia as well. So please check back occasionally. If you have questions or find a game or find something interesting, shoot it to me. I do have some resources that I'm already going through, but I'm always happy to see some new sources of new race games. And last, but certainly not least, the safe squares or special spaces. Now, this is, and I sort of stretched to get this one to make it fit for some of these games, because like Backgammon, the actual board itself doesn't have any special spaces indicated. There's a special section on the Backgammon board that I guess I need to add this. I've thought about that. That's the home board that matters per player. But there are safe spaces that do exist and are created during the game. So in this case, a point with 2 or more pieces of the same color is considered safe. So the opponent cannot land on it, which does actually block the opponent as well. So if you have pieces that are blocking that player's starting board, or in my case, my home board, that makes the other player have a harder chance to get their pieces back in when they've been knocked off. But that's not really necessarily a cause of the board, it's causes of pieces. So similar to looking at like Senate, when the pieces are stacked together, same idea. Now Senate does have a special set of spaces, and this is the weird one. So there are 30 spaces in Senate. So 1 through 15 is your starting spots. I'm sorry, 1 through 14 is your starting spots, and 15 being the first space available. So it's called the House of Rebirth as the starting square, and the return square for any pawns reaching square 27, which we'll talk about in a second. So the house names that are mentioned here, these are all part of that Journey of the Dead. They have a few different names. These are the ones I found that are most common, that made the most sense to me based on the pictures on the board. There's some variations of those names based on numbers, based on different journeys and different cultures in that would make those names change slightly. These all made the most sense to me. Square 26, 27, 28, 29 are the special ones. So these are the ones that give you that last 5 spots or 4 spots that are the difference where the sort of rules change. So 26 is the House of Happiness. This is the mandatory square for all pawns. Now this is an odd mechanic as well, that as you're moving through the board, every pawn or every piece has to stop at square 26, which means you have to not only roll the exact number to get off the board, you have to roll the exact number to get onto the final path. Square 27 is the House of Water. This is the water trap, so to speak. Any pawns that hit this square are ejected and moved back to square 15. Now, it's also any square spaces that are on 28, 29, and 30 in this case. If they are forced to move and cannot move, off, they go back to 27, which would then reject it back to 15. Now, that's a really odd mechanic when I looked at it, and it took me a while to sort of figure out what that meant. And I looked at a couple different texts, a couple different variations of the game, and even looked at some of there's online versions of Senate, and all of them do it differently. So this was my sort of summation of those rules. Is that House of Water is a catch-all penalty space, for lack of a better term. And then 28, 29 are your House of Three Truths and the House of Verthum, which is just sort of the next two spots available. Square 30 had some names, but I couldn't find a consistent one that made sense. Generally, the names of those last three spaces are variations of 3, variations of 2, and variations of 1. Was the thing I found the most in common between them, being that's the number of spaces you have to move to get off from that space. A lot of times the symbol on it was usually a three triangles, three circles, that sort of thing, or then a 2 and then 1, to show you the indicator of number of spaces moved. Now, that could just also be some of our bias on, we saw number of dots, we saw number of spaces, made sense. All right, 5 lines. So 5 lines has one special space, which is the sacred line being in the center of the board for both players. It is the only space that can hold more than one piece, and is the target square for the win condition. It is the only one, because it is the only one that can hold more than one piece. It also can hold more than one player at a time. So as you're moving around, this is sort of a safe space for both players to land on. There is a variant that I've applied to the game when I've played it, where you can only have 5 pieces in that row. It's been rare that it's ever happened where there was a need to have more than 5 pieces, but that's a sort of variant you can apply. That would give you a different mechanic. Again, I don't think I've ever had it happen where it came up, where we when you needed to add a 6 space to that because somebody was all in that one spot, but it could happen. And then lastly, we have the roll game of yore. Any spaces not in the center row are considered safe. So you have 4 spaces leading into the center, and then 2 spaces leading off of the center that are only owned by that player. So I have my space, you have your spaces. These are considered safe spaces because you physically cannot get to them. Your track runs here, my track runs here. We only share parts of it. There are also 5 spaces marked with rosettes, or I've seen rosettes, I've seen different symbols. Basically, in my case, you could use something for your kingdom, something for your personal heraldry, whatever. 2 of these are in player safe zones. So you have one at sort of in space 4, and then one at the very end. And then there's also one in the center row. The one in the center row is the most important because it not only is it considered it gives you something special, which in this case, if you land on the rosette, you get another turn or you get another roll. In the center row, it is also considered a safe space. So it is the only safe space in the center row, which is a huge deal when you're looking at it. It's also because it's 4 spaces out from the rosette on the player's side. So you can jump from your rosette to the center rosette and essentially occupy it. And the more time you occupy that, the better, because moving past it is dangerous. But occupying it does keep the player from being able to move into that space, would stop them from moving, into a safe space, and also keep them from occupying. So that's important. All right. That's what I've got, guys. So if there are any Laurel or artisan types in the group, please do not judge my resources. These are all mostly internet links that are things I found. Some of them are pretty good. British Museum is good. Academia.edu is good. Some of these are pretty sketchy, but I will show you some other resources I have that I use personally. Kill my stream there. There we go. All right. So, for anybody interested in board games, there we go. R.C. Bell, Board and Table Games for Many Civilizations. Now, this is a Dover published book, but let me caveat that with this edition is Dover published because there are 2 versions of Bell's book. Yep. So this is volume 1. Ooh, sorry about that. My background's trying to eat it. There's also volume 2 in this same book. So that is what it is. Dover just republished this into one binding. It's an amazing book, has a lot of good resources, has a lot of good information in it, from rules to history. Does some of the same connections that I do, like here's a chapter on race games, here's a chapter on war games, things like that. Another good book is Salmala Corpulent put out a book, and he was a SCA, I think he was a Laurel, but he was another games person. It's called Medieval Games. I don't have a copy of it sitting around here anywhere. I mean, it's here somewhere, but I don't know where it's at. But if you find that, Medieval Games by Salmala is a great book. Now, my one claim about him, or at least the version I have, is there are no references in it. So you're literally having to guess where he got this information from, or just trust him. But apparently there are copies out there that have references in them or have reference tables in them. I need to find one. I need to find a reference table at least to add to mine, because apparently it exists, but my copy does not have it. I was gifted from a friend. So other good resources. So recently there have been a lot of finds, a lot of digs, a lot of things coming up in museums. I say recently, like the last 5 years. So there are a lot of museums out there that have things available and are starting to become more available with games. Specifically things like Toffle and Backgammon that are starting to come up a lot more, especially some of the early period stuff. Obviously there's a lot of late period Backgammon, a lot of late period checkers and chess. Those are easy to find generally. Senate is another one, and Roll Game of Yours is another one that are a little harder to find. We know they exist. We've seen documentation of them. Finding the resources is a little more difficult, but they're starting to be out there. So, it's coming available. If you're interested in that, and I'll sort of plug things here before I do my sign off. But I'm in the process of building it, but my website will be up here soon. Kalbardrscorner.com. Kalbardrscorner.com. Then I'm going to put all my handouts on, put all my research information on, and start sort of linking resources so that people can have them. Also, you found my YouTube channel here. Please subscribe. It not only helps me with traffic and getting the information out there, but also will let you be alerted to new videos that I put up. My goal is to publish all my games classes through this YouTube channel so that people can find them. And also, I have more than just games. I have heraldry classes. I have some siege engine stuff. I have some current Middle Ages. I teach like protocol and precedence and honor and courtesy and other things like that as well. And if anyone's out there is interested or wants to teach classes but doesn't necessarily have the patience or time to go through all of the fancy YouTube-y stuff that I'm doing, let me know. More than happy to produce classes for you and get you out here on the channel and let you teach people as part of this effort, especially in the COVID times we are currently in this plague we were all suffering. It is awesome to be able to do this to people and just get this information out there. I've always been a proponent of teaching classes online because it helps people who can't get to events, even when we have events. But then we run into things like this, and we're like, look, all we have is this. So it's a good time to connect. And I love having guests. So if you have a topic you want to talk about, or want to play a game with me, or have a favorite game you want to play, let's do that. Let's play a game. So there, yeah. So cover the internet, or cover the website, cover the YouTube channel. Also look me up on Facebook. Facebook Kalbardr's Corner. I usually do events on there. So like when I have a class like this, I'll throw an event up on the Facebook just so gets people in there. And yeah. So it has been a pleasure talking to you all. We're yeah, cool. 15 minutes out. I'm good with that. If there are any questions, I'm more than happy to field them. Also, afterwards, anybody watching this later, please throw the questions in the comments. I'll address them when I can. I do get alerts on those periodically. Like I think like once a day, I get a blast email from YouTube. More than happy to answer them. My email is my name, kalbardr.geiler@gmail.com. Anybody from Atlantia got an email from me, I hope last night. I'm not sure if that system worked or not. I think it's built on squirrel mail, which scares me, but it's there. But if you can't find that, again, look me up through my YouTube or look me up through my Facebook, and I'll be more than happy to answer questions for you. And if you're hanging around, I've got another class here in about 15 minutes. I'm going to go grab a fresh cup of coffee, and then we'll do some how to play Alkirk. That'll be fun. So this has been Lord Kalbardr Geiler for Kalbardr's Corner. Thanks, everybody.